Can it work for hardware stores?
Well, why not? What do you say, Curtis?
Well,
Oh, come on, Curtis. If we can't make it bigger, let's make it better.
And we're surprised that Fox at the script level didn't see this and go,
What happens when networks bet everything on the wrong ideas? There are shows that prove that star power and big budgets can't save terrible concepts. One Civil War comedy caused protests before it even aired. Only 4 episodes made it to television. Another featured insurance mascots trying to carry entire storylines. Critics said it was extinct on arrival. The third was a spin-off of the most beloved war comedy ever made. It went from ratings gold to complete cancellation in record time. The failures were so legendary, they're still used as warnings decades later. Number 10, My Mother the Car. There was once a show that became the ultimate punchline in television history. It started in September 1965 and lasted just until April 1966. It was called My Mother the Car, and even now, people remember it for all the wrong reasons. The idea behind the show was strange enough to make anyone stop and stare. A man discovers that his dead mother has come back as a talking car. Not just any car, but an old 1928 Porter. She speaks to him through the radio and gives him life advice. NBC thought it might be charming. Critics thought it was something else entirely. People couldn't believe a show like this even got made. It wasn't just weird, it was laughable. Even though the 1960s were filled with magical and oddball comedies like Bewitched and My Favorite Martian, this one crossed the line into pure nonsense. Adults watching at the time didn't know whether to laugh or change the channel. By the time TV Guide made its list in 2002, they ranked My Mother the Car as the second worst TV show ever made. Only The Jerry Springer Show ranked lower, and that wasn't even a sitcom. The actor Jerry Van Dyke played the lead role. Years later, he admitted he'd made a huge mistake. He had the chance to be on Gilligan's Island, but turned it down. Instead, he ended up talking to a car for 30 full episodes. That regret followed him for the rest of his career. Audiences never really accepted the show, and the ratings were always behind other comedies of the time. But the legend of how bad it was kept growing. It got passed around as a joke. People would say the title out loud and laugh. It became a way to describe something that never should have happened. Even now, whenever someone brings up the worst shows ever made, this one almost always comes up first. Not because it was offensive, but because the idea was so ridiculous that no one could take it seriously. It didn't just fail. It failed in a way that made people remember it for decades. Number 9. Homeboys in Outer Space. It aired in 1996 on a new network called UPN. The title alone made people do a double take. 2 friends flying through space in a beat-up ship they called the Space Hoopty, dressed like they'd walked off a hip-hop music video, cracking one-liners and chasing aliens. It tried to be funny, it tried to be edgy, but it missed the mark completely. Critics were brutal. The show looked cheap. The jokes were loud and forced. The characters were walking stereotypes. Reviewers called it bizarre, lazy, and embarrassing. One even said it wasn't just bad, it was confusing, like it was made up during a long lunch break. Viewers agreed. By the time UPN canceled the show in 1997, it had only lasted 1 season with 21 episodes. People had stopped watching almost immediately. Ratings dropped fast. The patience of the audience ran out even faster. What made it worse was that UPN had been trying something new. In the mid-90s, they were trying to create shows for African American viewers. Some of those shows worked, like Moesha and Star Trek, Voyager. But Homeboys in Outer Space was the kind of misstep that haunted them. It didn't just flop, It became a warning sign about what happens when networks chase ideas without thinking them through. Later, it was added to TV Guide's list of the 50 worst shows ever made. No one was surprised. If anything, people were surprised it wasn't ranked even lower. It became one of those things people brought up when they needed an example of how bad TV could get. Even the name was enough to make people laugh awkwardly. Number 8. Work It. In 2012, ABC released a sitcom so strange and tone-deaf that people couldn't believe it was real. The show was called Work It, and it only lasted 2 episodes before the network pulled it off the air. The idea behind the show was 2 men pretending to be women so they could get jobs during a recession. It was supposed to be funny, like an updated version of Bosom Buddies, but it had none of the charm or cleverness. Instead, it relied on old, tired jokes about gender, and the way it handled the subject upset a lot of people. From the very beginning, the show was torn apart by critics. It got a shockingly low score of 19 out of 100 on Metacritic, meaning nearly everyone hated it. On Rotten Tomatoes, it started off with a flat-out 0%. Not one positive review. Critics didn't just dislike it, they seemed shocked that ABC actually aired it. One reviewer from USA Today, Robert Bianco, wrote that it was dreadful almost beyond comprehension, listing everything wrong with it, from the writing to the lighting. The New York Post didn't even try to be polite. They just said, "What a dumb show." On top of that, LGBTQ+ groups were angry too. They felt the show was harmful because it made men in dresses the punchline instead of actually telling a thoughtful story. But the biggest blow came from the viewers. The first episode managed to get about 6.2 million people to watch, probably just out of curiosity. But by the second episode, it dropped to 4.9 million. That was a huge fall in just 1 week. ABC saw the warning signs and canceled it almost immediately. The date was January 13, 2012, just days after the second episode aired. Even though they had filmed 13 episodes, only 2 were ever shown. The failure was so complete that even the network started making fun of it. In a last-ditch effort to save it, ABC used actual bad reviews in their promos, calling the show offensive, reprehensible, and morally wrong. It was meant to be clever, but it didn't work. Nobody was watching anymore. People joked that even the ABC executives couldn't sit through a 3rd episode. Since then, Work It has become one of those shows people mention when talking about the worst sitcoms ever made. One critic said it would be remembered for years as the perfect example of how badly a sitcom can go. And sadly for ABC, that turned out to be true. Work It didn't just flop. Number 7. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer. It all started in 1998, when a new comedy show was announced by UPN. Before it even aired, people were already angry. The show was called The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, and its main character was a black English nobleman who escaped to America during the Civil War, and somehow ended up working as President Abraham Lincoln's butler. The idea alone upset many people. They didn't think slavery or that part of history should ever be made into a joke. By the time October came around and the show was about to premiere, the protests had already begun. The NAACP's Los Angeles chapter and many other African American groups said the show was offensive, and they demanded that UPN cancel it. People were especially upset about reports that the original pilot had included a gallows scene and other deeply troubling jokes related to slavery. Under all that pressure, UPN tried to calm things down. They removed the original episode and replaced it with a different one that was supposed to be less offensive. But it was already too late. The main problem wasn't just one episode, it was the entire idea behind the show. They were trying to create a comedy using slavery and Civil War themes, but without the thoughtfulness, cleverness, or care that kind of story needed. What came out instead was something crude and tone-deaf. When the show finally aired, it was a disaster. Critics didn't hold back. One even said the show was nothing more than a dumb, lewd sitcom full of shock jokes. Viewers clearly agreed. That first episode landed near the very bottom of the ratings list, ranking 116th out of 125 shows that week. After only 4 episodes, UPN took it off the air. They had filmed 9 episodes in total, but 5 of them never even got broadcast. The failure didn't just hurt the show, it hurt the people behind it too. The president of UPN at the time was reportedly confused about why the show had made people so angry. That attitude made things worse. The whole mess ended up speeding up his departure from the network. Years later, the creators of the show tried to explain what they were actually going for. They said the real goal was to poke fun at the political scandals of the 1990s, especially the ones surrounding President Bill Clinton. But by setting the story during the Civil War and using characters connected to slavery and Lincoln, that message never came through. All people saw was a show making light of serious historical trauma, and they didn't find it funny. Number 6. Cavemen. In 2007, ABC made a decision that left almost everyone confused. They took a series of quirky insurance ads from Geeko and tried to turn them into a sitcom. The result was Cavemen, and from the very start, people could feel something was off. The show followed 3 cavemen living in San Diego, trying to deal with modern life while looking like they'd just stepped out of the Stone Age. ABC called it a buddy comedy that would flip stereotypes upside down, but critics weren't buying it. Even before the show aired, reviews were brutal. When it finally premiered in fall 2007, people tuned in out of curiosity. But once they saw it, that curiosity quickly turned into disappointment. Viewers realized that the whole show was built around just one joke, and even that joke wasn't very funny the first time. Ratings collapsed almost immediately. ABC had filmed 13 episodes, but they only aired 6 before yanking it off the air completely. The reaction from critics was downright savage. The Chicago Tribune didn't hold back and ranked it among the 25 worst TV shows ever made. The New York Post called it extinct on arrival. One of the most cutting reviews came from Ginia Belafonte at the New York Times, who said, "I laughed, but I laughed through my pain. Cavemen doesn't have moments as much as microseconds suspended from any attempt at narrative. It was a show that didn't just fall flat, it was embarrassing." On top of the weak humor, Cavemen tried to get serious with social commentary. The cavemen were meant to reflect real-life marginalized groups, but that message never landed the way the creators hoped. Instead of being clever or eye-opening, it just felt awkward and sometimes even offensive. The thick makeup and goofy slapstick didn't help. Every episode felt like it was stretching a 30-second commercial into 22 long, painful minutes. Years later, Cavemen is still remembered, but not in a good way. It's become a go-to example of how not to turn a commercial into a TV show. People still bring it up as a cautionary tale. While the Gecko Gecko wisely stuck to commercials, these cavemen got thrown into prime time and quickly became a national joke. ABC once said the show would challenge stereotypes. In the end, it only confirmed one, that some ideas should stay in the ad break. Number 5. After MASH. After the final episode of MASH aired in 1983, it was clear the show had made history. It had lasted 11 years, earned awards, and its last episode became the most-watched television event ever at that time. So when CBS announced a spin-off called After MASH, people were curious. It started in late 1983 with familiar faces like Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy, now working at a veterans hospital in the U.S. The first few episodes actually did well. Ratings were high at first because fans missed the original show and wanted more. But that didn't last long. CBS made a mistake when they moved Aftermash to a different night. It now aired against NBC's popular action show, The A-Team, and that hurt badly. Viewers stopped watching. The new setting didn't have the same feeling. Without the war backdrop and the full MASH cast, it just felt boring. Critics said it tried to be emotional, but it ended up dull. One review even joked that when you remove the horrors of war and replace it with a quiet suburb, you end up with nothing worth watching. That really said it all. By the end of 1984, CBS gave up. Ratings had crashed, and the network canceled the show just 9 episodes into its second season. The fall was fast and painful. What made it worse was how much people kept talking about how bad it was. In 2002, TV Guide officially named Aftermash the 7th worst show of all time. That stung. It also made sure no other MASH spin-offs would happen. They even had plans for a show about Radar O'Reilly, but it never made it past the pilot stage. Even though Aftermash got 1 Emmy nomination for directing, that small moment of praise couldn't save it. Jamie Farr, who played Klinger, later said he realized things were going downhill when the network started using gimmicks, like putting him in a nun's outfit just to grab attention. Fans didn't like that. Writers and producers now use the word Aftermash as a warning. It means don't make a sequel unless it's truly worth it. The original show was powerful and had heart. The spin-off didn't. In the end, Aftermash became more of a sad reminder than a proud continuation. People were almost relieved it got canceled because it meant MASH's legacy would stay untouched. Number 4. Hello, Larry. In 1979, actor McLean Stevenson made a huge career mistake. He was one of the biggest stars on MASH, playing the lovable Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake. At the height of the show's popularity, he made a risky move. He left the show to become the lead in his own sitcom called Hello, Larry. NBC hoped it would work, and so did Stevenson. But it didn't, not even close. The show was about a divorced radio talk show host living in Portland, trying to raise 2 teenage daughters. It was supposed to be funny and warm, but the writing was weak, and the jokes didn't land. From the start, it felt off. People tuned in at first just because they remembered Stevenson from MASH, but they didn't stay. Ratings were low, but NBC didn't cancel it right away because they had no better options at the time. Critics didn't hold back. They called it flat, lifeless, and painfully unfunny. Even Johnny Carson, the king of late-night TV, made fun of Hello, Larry on his show over and over. It became a running joke in Hollywood. People didn't just dislike it. They laughed at how bad it was. Years later, columnist Ariana Huffington even joked that John McCain's return to politics got a colder welcome than McLean Stevenson did when he tried to go back to MASH. After Hello, Larry failed. That line hurt because it was true. The show ran for 2 short seasons, ending in 1980 after just 35 episodes. TV Guide later ranked it the 12th worst show of all time. For Stevenson, it was a turning point, and not in a good way. He never found the same success again. His decision to leave MASH is still used as a warning in the industry. Whenever an actor walks away from a hit show and ends up with a flop, people say, "He pulled a McLean Stevenson." That phrase alone keeps Hello, Larry in pop culture memory, not because it was good, but because it became a textbook example of how quickly a career can fall apart. Some TV experts have tried to defend it a little, saying NBC was in a ratings slump in the late 70s, and even good shows might have struggled. But no matter the context, Hello, Larry just didn't make people laugh. And that's what it needed most. It wasn't just a weak show. It became a symbol of wasted potential and a reminder that timing and talent are everything. Number 3. Life with Lucy. In 1986, something happened that almost no one expected. Lucille Ball, one of the most beloved stars in television history, decided to come out of retirement. She was 75 years old, and after decades of success with shows like I Love Lucy and The Lucy Show, ABC gave her a brand new sitcom called Life with Lucy. It was supposed to be her big return, but what followed turned out to be heartbreaking. Lucille wasn't just starring in the show. She had full control over it. ABC didn't even test the pilot episode. They skipped the usual process because they trusted her so much. Everyone at the network thought the magic of Lucy would work again. But the world had changed, and Lucy's new show didn't keep up with it. Life with Lucy tried to bring back the same kind of comedy she was famous for in the 1950s. It had physical humor, silly misunderstandings, and Lucy playing a nosy grandmother who always got into trouble. But by the mid-1980s, TV comedy had moved on. Shows like The Cosby Show and Cheers were dominating the ratings, offering more modern and relatable stories. Audiences had changed, and when Life with Lucy premiered, people tuned in at first out of curiosity. In fact, it actually won its time slot during the first week. But after that, things fell apart. Viewers didn't laugh. Critics were harsh. The Washington Post called it embarrassing. The Associated Press said it was silly and sad. One critic even asked, "How could she do this to herself?" The New York Times said the show was desperately trying to prove that the old routines still worked. But they didn't. ABC had ordered 13 episodes, but they only aired 8. The ratings dropped so fast that the network had no choice but to cancel it in November 1986. Lucille Ball was crushed. In an interview later, she said, "I cried. My God, I cried." After reading the bad reviews, she had hoped this show would remind people why they fell in love with her in the first place. Instead, it became her only true failure on television. Behind the scenes, people close to the production believed part of the problem was that no one could say no to her. Lucille had surrounded herself with the same writers and team from decades earlier. It was all done the old way, with no updates, no changes, just pure nostalgia. But nostalgia alone wasn't enough. Years before, in 1977, Lucille had said she was proud of knowing when to walk away. Sadly, Life with Lucy forced her to learn that lesson again. After the show ended, she stayed mostly out of the spotlight. The show wasn't rerun much, and even fans tried to forget it happened. Number 2. Emily's Reasons Why Not. When Emily's Reasons Why Not finally aired in 2006, most people had already seen the ads. ABC had spent a fortune turning it into the face of their new lineup. The network believed so strongly in it that they didn't even ask to see a full pilot script before greenlighting the series. They were that confident. Heather Graham was already a known name, and the idea of a self-help author struggling with dating seemed like a safe hit. Billboards went up in every major city. Magazine covers featured Heather smiling. Commercials ran constantly. It was supposed to be huge. On January 9, 2006, the first episode aired. About 6.2 million people tuned in, mostly out of curiosity after all the promotion. But by the time it ended, the mood had completely changed. Viewers didn't laugh. The tone felt strange, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to be sweet or snarky. Heather Graham's character came off as cold and unlikable. Critics were harsh. The New York Times flat out said the lead character wasn't someone people would root for, which is a death sentence for a romantic comedy. Even stranger, some pro-abstinence groups were upset that the lead was celibate. Somehow, that storyline managed to offend both sides. The next day, ABC canceled the entire show. Just like that. After one episode, it became a running joke in Hollywood. One and done. Magazines that hit stands later that week still had Heather Graham on the cover talking about a series that no longer existed. Inside ABC, it was total embarrassment. They had dumped millions into promotion, only to yank the show before it had any chance to find its rhythm. Stephen McPherson, ABC's entertainment president at the time, admitted they had no confidence it would get better. The pilot they saw just wasn't good, and they didn't see any hope for improvement. The unaired episodes were quietly sent overseas, where they aired without much notice. Heather Graham didn't seem too shaken by it. She did some interviews, kept it light, and moved on. But for ABC, it was a very expensive lesson. You can't sell something just because it looks shiny. If there's nothing underneath, it will fall apart fast. Emily's Reasons Why Not became part of a strange club. Shows that were canceled after one episode are rare, but they do happen. It joined others like South of Sunset in 1990 and Public Morals in 1996. But Emily stood out because of how big the hype was and how fast it fell apart. No slow decline, no second chances, just a hard stop. For years after, it was brought up as an example of what happens when networks put marketing ahead of substance. And for viewers who watched that one episode, it was clear why Emily had her reasons. Number 1. Dads. When Dads first showed up in 2013, people had high hopes. It came from Seth MacFarlane, the same guy who made Family Guy, so the network thought it would be another hit. The story was about two friends running a video game company whose loud, politically incorrect fathers suddenly move in with them, but instead of being funny, the show felt like it was stuck in the past. Right from the first episode, it made people uncomfortable. One scene had a woman dressed as a sexy Asian schoolgirl, used as a setup for a cheap racist joke. That moment alone told viewers what kind of show it was going to be. The jokes were clunky, the laughter was fake, and critics were brutal. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a shocking 0% when it premiered, and even after a while, it only climbed to a miserable 8%. Over at Metacritic, it scored just 15 out of 100. Reviewers didn't just dislike it, they were angry. Some called it offensive. Others said it was morally wrong. Fox even used those angry quotes in its ads, as if trying to turn hate into curiosity. But it didn't work. Even though the show managed to survive a full season with 18 episodes, that was likely because of MacFarlane's name, not because people liked it. As time went on, ratings kept falling, and the criticism never stopped. Reporters asked the cast and crew again and again why the show leaned so hard into racist and sexist jokes. The team promised they would tone things down, but nothing really changed. In May 2014, Fox had enough. They canceled Dads and didn't even bother airing one of the episodes they'd already filmed. Just like that, it was over. Critics looked back and called it one of the worst shows of the year. One review from The Hollywood Reporter said it made them feel stupid almost immediately. Another described the main characters as people you'd never want to be around. The show didn't just miss the mark, it missed the entire decade. It also came out at the wrong time. By 2014, audiences had less patience for lazy jokes about race and gender. People were starting to expect smarter comedy. So instead of being edgy or cool, Dads just felt old and mean. Its failure wasn't just a flop, it was a warning. Viewers had moved on, but this show hadn't. Now, when people talk about Dads, it's usually as an example of everything that can go wrong when you mix shock humor with bad timing.